everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore coming at you from Breckenridge, Colorado. Hope you're having an amazing day. On this episode of the show, Kyle and I speak about my recent trip to the Telluride Mushroom Festival, which has been around for 39 years and is a mushroom festival for sure, but it's one of the very few mushroom festivals where you can be very explicit about psychedelics and psychedelic mushrooms and plenty of other topics that aren't really comfortable at a traditional mushroom festival where they just want to talk about taxonomy, evolution, defense mechanisms, and the science, the basic science of mushrooms that doesn't involve the psychedelic angles. So Telluride's a stunningly beautiful place, and if you ever get the opportunity to go to Telluride, take the chance. It's beautiful. I think it's one of the most beautiful towns in the country, for sure. Not the buildings, but, you know, the buildings juxtaposed with the huge cliffs and the mountains on all sides. So, one last announcement, I guess. We are launching our Navigating Psychedelics live editions. We've got one for a general audience and then one for clinicians and therapists. We've been really helping therapists get a footing in this space. There's a lot of people that are just, you know, professionals or like in grad school trying to figure out their professional path and saying, how can psychedelics be part of my future? And this is really a great 101 that will enable you to understand the rest of the field of psychedelics and hopefully pick your way through where you want to be. Like maybe you want to be a therapist focused on ketamine or psilocybin, who knows? But our course helps you figure all that out and helps give you a solid foundation that really will serve you well going forward. It's modeled after the Groff framework around psychedelics, comes out of a lot of LSD psychotherapy work and holotropic breath work. So it's just an amazing package, and folks coming out of it are very happy, very grateful. I think the one for therapists has 17 masterclasses in it beyond what we do in the pre-recorded content and our 5 weekly meetups online to just have general class time where you can talk to Kyle and I. So if you're looking to further your path, check out the Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists, or live Navigating Psychedelics for a general audience, which is just psychonauts and others just trying to figure out where they stand around this stuff and how to be safer and function better in the space. So thanks everybody for listening. This is Joe Moore signing off from Breckenridge, Colorado. Well, here we are. What is it? August 19, the day after the Telluride Mushroom Festival ends. I'm in my new office here in Breckenridge, and Kyle and I are going to try to recap my weekend at the Telluride Mushroom Festival. Yeah, so here's the program. I kind of forgot that the theme was so psychedelically oriented. Healing the Mind, Healing the Planet was the name of the kind of theme of the conference. This is the 39th annual, so the conference is older than me, which is pretty cool. And it's essentially, so I came up with this thought, and I think it's pretty true. This was essentially like a placeholder psychedelic conference. Well, you know, before Horizons was going, and even in the middle of the MAPS conferences, like not happening, like what are they, every 4 years or something? Like this is a conference that's been happening for ages where psychedelics were very comfortably discussed. And, you know, this is a conference around mushrooms, but apparently in the mushroom world, like the mycology world, the psychedelic topic isn't that comfortably included into events. So like the main national event here in the States, NAMA, doesn't like it when people go to NAMA events and find cubensis mushrooms or psilocybe mushrooms in the woods and brings them to the table. Like that really makes them mad. And when you want to talk about it at their conferences, that kind of makes them mad too. They don't necessarily want to talk about like the nuances of the psilocybin potentiated experience, which is interesting.
Well, I guess it kind of makes sense. Like if they're really trying to do legit mycology. I mean, legit mycology would obviously include all the psilocybin containing mushrooms, but I think just because of the taboo and whatnot, it's like, how do you make this not about trippy mushrooms? We're doing legit stuff here, right?
Yeah, we're not all clowns. But it was interesting to see that. I had been twice before, and loved it, which is why I wanted to go this third time and, just kind of represent psychedelics today. So some notable folks at the event: Britt Bunyard, he's amazing. He runs Fungi magazine. He's got a lot to say about psychedelic compounds, but a lot more to say about fungi in general. Trad Cotter was there. Trad's kind of like a, let's call him Paul Stamets version 2. He's very excitable. He's a great public speaker. He's got a ton of knowledge, and he's got a really large facility in South Carolina called Mushroom Mountain, where they're producing tons of spawn and doing tons of research and development on various mushroom-related products and applications. So it's really interesting. He's also got a business coming up.
Did you get to connect with him at all? Because I know you've connected with him in the past.
Yeah, we chatted a few times.
Awesome.
I let him know via email we would be there, and we kind of like had some plans to meet up, and got to chat maybe 3 times. He's got an interesting business coming up called Blue Portal. Going to do some mushroom facilitation elsewhere and not in the States. So, stay tuned for that. As with all other facilities that aren't ours, we can't really endorse it, unfortunately, but maybe someday we can. It'd be nice to be able to endorse someplace. Teresa Egbert was supposed to be there. She was sick, so she couldn't make it. It was a bummer. Larry Evans is super cool. He's this guy. I bought a bunch of DVDs from him years ago about like identifying mushrooms, and he's been involved in Blue Portal. He's a really funny guy.
Do you want to backtrack really quick and maybe let people know who Teresa is? Because she does have an interesting story. I don't know if everybody listening recognizes that name. Yeah.
So let's start. She's a serious psychedelic activist out of Fort Collins currently. Fort Collins, Colorado. Started the Fort Collins Psychedelic Club. I think also a mycological society up there. And just super duper active. You can check her out at Herbal Visions with a Z online. And I think
she was managing the Decrim Colorado Instagram.
She was very involved in that. Yeah. She's a super activist, like wildly active, and is constantly educating folks around mushrooms and psychedelics. So she's on the team. So thank you, Teresa, for doing what you do. Sorry you couldn't make it. It's a real bummer. I was trying to record with her while we were there, and it didn't work out, obviously, because she wasn't there. This person was amazing. Juliana Furchi. She's from Chile and runs the Fungi Foundation. So you know how like there's the WWF protecting wildlife,
right?
Like
not the wrestling
in various, which I think is phased out now.
It is, yeah.
So she essentially started the first ever international conservation or NGO around fungi. So developing ecological protections around fungi. So if it's a super rare or endangered fungi in Chile, the government now has to do site remediation and planning around the at-risk or endangered species of fungi, which is really cool. So this term flora and fauna that we hear all the time? She was a co-author on this paper to propose fungia. So it's no longer just plants and animals, it's plants, animals, and fungia. So it's really cool that that's now something to be discussed in the scientific literature and culturally. Like that really adds an extra layer when you're looking out in the woods. Like there's this whole kind of unseen landscape of fungi helping keep the forest alive and the ecosystem alive.
Right.
Yeah. Hoping to get her on the show in the near future. She agreed. We'll have to do it remotely, unfortunately. Yeah, super brilliant person, incredibly dedicated to mushrooms. And she actually said she had some things to share about psychedelic mushrooms in Chile.
Cool. Yeah, I was going to ask, like, what's the mushroom culture like down in Chile?
It's gonna be interesting. So it's a really Catholic country, right? And just South America in general is. So perhaps it's forbidden. Perhaps it's similar to Jamaica, where it's just for witchcraft.
Right.
But Chile is an incredibly diverse country.
Yeah.
It's just this long, narrow strip from like Tierra del Fuego. She calls it the beginning of the earth, not the end of the earth. Like all the way at those islands at the bottom, all the way up to like deserts in the north.
Yeah.
So like Arctic to like super. Yeah. So I don't think that country's easy to understand, so it's going to be interesting.
Very long. Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It's crazy.
So very psychedelically oriented were Peter Hendricks and Sarah Lapin. They're out of Birmingham, Alabama, doing the cocaine psilocybin study. University of Birmingham, I think. And I believe their funds are coming from Hefter. And they got to present some of their results, not like their total findings, but they got to share stories from patients and, some of their data from the 10 participants they've gone through. What wasn't clear to me if it was crack or cocaine, or if there's a differentiation in the literature. I plan to record with Peter next week, honestly, in Denver. Cool. He's going to be in Denver again, so we'll be able to record for that, hopefully. I got to email him today about that.
Was there anything that stood out about that talk? Like, what was some of their data like or outcome like?
Let's see. Overall, great results. So cocaine addicts in the poor South, very poor, undereducated Black people, very disadvantaged folks going to therapy. And even if they received the placebo, it was just an amazing experience for them. It was the first time they ever felt safe.
Wow.
And supported by two people. Growing up in broken homes in the streets, like just scratching your existence away, trying to survive. It's not easy. So this was, I think, a big thing there. Secondarily, a few things about psilocybin in the Black community. Like we've talked about this a number of times. Like there's a really dark legacy from the medical establishment in psychedelia and in medicine in general because of like stuff like the Tuskegee experiment, where they just let syphilis run wild in populations and said, nope, yeah, we're treating it with this placebo, but they just wanted to study what the course of the disease did. There was years of forced sterilization of these minorities. So there's a good reason to be skeptical of the medical establishment, right? So recruitment is super hard as a result of that. Also, this particular population, highly unpredictable. So, often they're just not showing for meetings. They're homeless, they're, addicted, and they just, are trying to shake it or, agreed to the study, but some crack or cocaine came up and they missed it the next day because they were up till 5 or whatever, the story. I know what problematic drug use looks like, and I can imagine what how that scene might play out for some folks.
Well, just even you saying like this one client or participant saying this is the first time they've ever felt safe. I mean, that just sounds huge in itself. Coming from that background, not having possibly trust in establishments, institutions, and like therapy in general. I mean, that sounds just huge in itself to feel safe, right?
It's terrifying that and it's really sad. But how often do we hear that in breathwork? This is the first time I ever felt safe. Like I've never felt this safe in my life, and I'm like, oh shit! Like it's such a simple technique that like why can't we expand it and have more people feel safe? But yeah, it's the mammalian brain not feeling safe is a really interesting thing, and it's a troublesome thing for many. It's kind of why we feel panicked often in our day-to-day. So yeah, one thing that struck me about a lot of these papers about psilocybin is the small sample size.
Right.
And it really sucks to see that. But I think as, Compass does their thing and they execute on phase 3, more and more psychiatrists will see an interest here and be interested, and therefore the funds will flow that way. At a certain point, like if the Europeans have access and we don't, or vice versa, the funds are just going to start flowing. They're going to be like, why can't I get this treatment? It's way more cost effective than going to talk therapy for 12 years.
Right.
Like, why? So I think those kind of pressures from the public will definitely make this stuff more available. So I got a little more hopeful about like the future of funding and this stuff. David Nichols was really kind of pessimistic a bunch of years ago about like the future of this research, and he was there. Dr. David Nichols, the famed chemist, made all the MDMA for MAPS and for Rick Strassman's DMT work, and plenty of other stuff. He was good colleagues with Sasha Shulgin. He was just really pessimistic years ago about the direction of his research and where it might go, and he seems like to really be on top of it.
How so? Like what changed?
So he's just seeing the actual attitudes. So he's interacting with scientists, with medical professionals, and he's consulting on these projects, and people are curious. So he's saying, oh shit, like this, I'm sure he didn't say, oh shit, but he's, he's observing change in public opinion, watching what Pollan's book's done. And it's done a lot. We talk about problems with it, but it's done a lot for us in the movement. And it's really awesome to see it play out like that. David Nichols gave this awesome talk. It was a keynote address, I think, on Friday night. I'm like in the midst of being super sick with a cold. I caught a cold like Thursday night. So I'm like
bummer,
delusional. Like felt like I was tripping on all these cold drugs I was on to like not sneeze all over the place. And Nichols is giving this amazing, super scientific talk discussing receptor sites and like, how ergotamines became LSD and all this stuff around psilocybin transfers. It's pretty awesome. One of the things that stuck out there for me was how quote unquote promiscuous the LSD molecule is on receptor sites. It's a ton. I think number one, because it's so small and it like hugs.
Right. Well, and that's why they say it lasts so long, because it just doesn't bind. It like hugs the receptor and attaches
it's that
to
shape.
It. Yeah.
And he got to do or help. I think one of his early studies actually kind of predicted that because they were like pre-molecular revolution. He's like, okay, there's these like diethyl bonds on the top. What is it? Lysergic acid diethylamide. Yeah. So it's that diethyl thing at the top that could be shaped like this, like a hook, or it could be like opposite directions or just fully open. So you can actually make variants of the LSD molecule that would no longer be LSD, obviously, but like by the shape, they can actually like predict this study downstream like 10, 20 years later. Wow. And that was really cool for him to show that, like, hey, look what we did here, and got into it like hard. And you could see all these mushroom people going, this chemistry is out of control. Like, I don't think we should be talking about this at a mushroom conference, but it's like, that's what happens when you get David Nichols on stage. He's like one of those chemistry dudes.
Yeah, it just makes sense to him. Some of that stuff goes way over my head, psychopharmacology and whatnot.
One of my favorite stories he shared was something along the line, and you guys can catch all this stuff on YouTube in the next week or so. Telluride Institute, there's going to be a playlist for Mushroom Festival. So Telluride Institute, Mushroom Festival on YouTube. And so he was on a panel discussion with Sasha Shulgin, Fadiman probably, and a few others. And they were talking about how like can animal models kind of come anywhere close to talking about human experience in psychedelic states. And like nobody really could respond, and like slowly he goes, all my rats were atheists. Just, all right. It's pretty interesting. Getting into like that whole thing around animal models and how he worked those to like come up with conclusions around neurotransmitters and some other interesting stuff. And he has another project coming down the pipes that I'm sure we're going to hear about that doesn't really have any applications to therapeutic use or recreational use, but I think it's going to help flesh out some neuroscience questions that we have about LSD.
Cool, that's exciting.
Yeah, so I was stoked to
not public
be able to chat
yet,
with him.
Unfortunately,
not public yet. No, he and I bumped into each other a few times. So of course, I'm trying to make that happen, right? Of course, you want to talk to David Nichols. I was wearing the Psychedelics Today black shirt with the spaceman on it with all the molecules.
Yeah.
And I was standing there with my girlfriend, and he just starts like pointing at the molecules and naming them. He goes, "Oh, that's let me just rush through this for you. DMT, mescaline, MDMA. Not so sure what that one is.
That might have been some psilocybin one. We had to get a reprint of it."
So he made two good points. Like there's a couple that I think were clearly wrong, and then some of them you can't tell what they are because they are missing that double line, like the hydrogen bond that you see sometimes. I don't know chemistry, so sorry, everybody. Hope I didn't help you fail your chemistry class. So that was all really cool. Then there was a panel discussion facilitated by Juliana Furci from Chile, Fungi Foundation, ffungi.org, and Peter Hendricks and Sarah Leppan from Birmingham, and David Nichols. And it went for 2 hours. Wow. It was a pretty intense panel session.
Was it just a lot of question and answer type style?
Pretty much. Nice. Yeah. Teresa was supposed to be on that panel, Teresa Egbert.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, bummer that she wasn't able to make it.
Yeah, it sucked. because she didn't make it, I considered like, hey, should I try to get on stage? It would have been awesome because there was a lot of like dangling questions.
Right.
The folks didn't. It's hard to know everything about psychedelics, especially if you're a scientist or a therapist doing that kind of work. Like we're kind of like journalists and educators, so we get exposed to so much more than a lot of people do. Which was a big realization for me.
Yeah, I mean, when I was recording with like Tom Lane, you know, I think I even put that in the intros. Like, this is such an interdisciplinary field, and to try to know everything is so hard. And it makes sense why people find specializations and, you know, they find their niche to really go into, because, oh man, the complexities, the little nuances, trying to understand every little topic. It's a lot to navigate.
I think in the early days of this project, you and I spoke at one point. I said something along the lines of, I guess I'm okay committing to this field for a long time, because even if I get bored with the data about therapy or about like neuroscience, there's still so much left to discover.
Oh man,
you know, from ethnobotany to whatever else, magic and shamanism,
folklore,
like, you know,
history. Yeah, there's so much there.
And this is a good thing that came out of the panel too. Peter Hendricks said, you know, we're just now at the point where we can start asking these questions. Like, these findings here allow us to ask more interesting questions. And
did he have an example of like what type of questions to ask?
Transmitters and you know, actually that was in particular around music. Okay. So like music for playlists. They're like, how do you do this? And one of their consistent variables at their site, Peter's site, is using the Hopkins playlist that is consistently used at Hopkins. And, you know, you and I could probably critique that playlist quite a bit, but we're not going to in that way, because in science, you need consistency and then you need a single variable.
Right.
Like when you start testing multiple variables, it doesn't really fly. And, you know, perhaps there is from speaking from the voice of science, perhaps there is a better playlist and perhaps there's a better way to do music. Mendel Kahlen's looking at this with wave paths, but, you know, coming from the Stan Grof world, the holotropic breathwork world, we have, you know, decades of insight into this question. So it's like, when I hear people talk about like psychedelic playlist, I'm always like, well, really, just now coming to this? Why don't you look at the holotropic breathwork literature that talks about music and make some extrapolations from there? Like, it's not perfect because the arc is different.
Right. Yeah.
But at least there's some good insights. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Stan worked with like a music therapist and really incorporated a lot of that stuff into his work. Jackie Smalls was her name, Jacqueline Smalls.
Jacqueline Smalls from UPsychia in Texas. And Christina Grof was super into music too. So I think that was the initial push to make music a big part of it.
Yeah.
You know, being into psychedelics and not being into music seems problematic to me.
Right. And it's so interesting. I was just listening to a podcast of somebody saying they brought their own music into a ketamine session. And, you know, from my perspective, I'm like, man, that's such a variable on the possible outcome, right? Because like if you had something that had a little bit more backing of this arc and this journey and like really how to navigate that with music versus like bringing in things with lyrics and, you know, just a lot of, you know, might not have that arc or that path with the music. It could, I don't know, how does that change the trip for somebody?
Potentially in huge ways, yeah. If we want to be rationalist here to a degree, like, which I think we shouldn't just throw caution to the wind and say, you know, God will pick up the dust. God will clean my room for me. Like, well, you know, maybe, but let's try to like err on the side of like the data we have about this stuff and do science the best we can. Like in the audience at one point, so this is a psychedelic heavy audience and they don't get exposed to psychedelic scientists too often. So I'll give them a break. But this person kind of started going off on how he thinks psychedelic therapists should have to have psychedelic experiences and they should be out about it. And that was actually an interesting conversation because they're like, you don't have to have PTSD to help treat somebody with PTSD in general. Right. And you don't need AIDS to treat somebody with AIDS or, you know, like it's not the most important factor. The most important factor is safety and comfort and, you know, a good therapeutic alliance, right? Like there's certain aspects that are amazingly important and others that are, you know, secondarily third tier.
Well, sometimes when you have that own experience, that stuff comes into the room, being like, oh, this is like what my experience was like, and maybe that will be helpful for them, and I know how to navigate this. And sometimes there's that like countertransference and whatnot there on the therapist versus the client. So I mean, like, it is interesting, like, like when working with people that had certain similar things, I'm like, oh, I really have to remove myself and try to be objective versus like letting my stuff come in and be like, oh yeah, I've been there before and I know it's right for you. Right. So it's a balance, I think, there.
It's a huge thing to discuss. The spirituality came up a few times because, these really undereducated people who are largely Christian had a lot of religious experiences related to Christianity. And an interesting point came up around like when Walter Pankey developed this mystical questionnaire. Is it MEQ is what it's called? Mystical Experience Questionnaire. That was came out at the Good Friday experiments, has been used in Hopkins study a lot. And I think they've improved it a little bit, but what does the word transcendence mean to somebody with a 5th grade reading level? Or perhaps is illiterate, and hasn't spent time like reading.
Well, Lenny tells a story about that.
Right,
do you remember that? Yeah, the guy who had like the vocabulary of a 5th grader, educating
just a dock worker in Baltimore, right?
Yeah, educating Stan about I forget what it was, just the mysteries.
The great recycling system in the sky.
That's
it. Just like using basic language, but to describe beautiful concepts. And these, so like the MEQ might not be the right questionnaire for all populations, especially like cocaine or crack addicted folks in really poor communities. With less education than most, but it's still it's a measure that they can use, and it's what's available, right? It's kind of like part of the standard inventory.
Well, I mean, didn't we even chat about that? Didn't we chat about that with David Luke about like even just coming up with like more vocabulary about these experiences, and some of these questionnaires might not even like really hit what we're trying to seek after or really try to understand.
That's a really good point. Yeah. So like these inventories are the best we've got, but we've got to come up with new ones over time and iterate and learn from, okay, we did these 20 sessions with these people and there was like a 6-month project each. And we don't have firm answers. Can we improve something to help us get more firm answers from this research? And I think, we need to structure that and spend some time doing that. Here's some inside dirt. Not really dirt. There's another conference coming up in October. I think October or November in New Orleans.
Cool.
Scientists only. If you've published serious quantitative data, I guess that means numbers, quantitative, numbers-based psychedelic data, you can come. So there's only about 70 or 80 people going to that, but it'll be the first gathering of its kind because there's finally enough scientists where they can do that kind of thing, which is amazing. And it's not for the general public. Like Telluride's kind of like the total opposite. There's like maybe a couple scientists like in the psychedelic space specifically, and then hundreds of essentially civilians.
I kind of thought that's what that Madison conference is going to be like, just because the lineup and the way that they were presenting things
seems super pro up there. We didn't actually talk to anybody about their experience, right? Like
from that conference? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's a bummer. That conference sounded cool. It just sounded a little specific for me to really want to go.
I forget what the name of it was. Time. Something consciousness. I don't remember.
Right. When you start using the word consciousness, I start going, are you using it the right way? Do I want to be involved? So, me being philosophical snob, language snob. So obviously microdosing came up a lot. It's a hot topic. Somebody was pretty much, and David Nichols shared his opinion on microdosing, how he doesn't think there's any real data for it, and how other projects, medically speaking, should be funded first. And Peter Hendricks and Sarah LePone were pretty quiet about it too, because there's no real new data, as you know from talking to Dr. Torsten Passy. Right. But that said, folks in the audience were saying, I know it works because my wife doesn't have migraines anymore, or it helped me with my traumatic brain injury and all these case studies. So a thing I really need to write about this, because I think it's really important. We're having a lot of language and communication issues around what microdosing is.
Right.
Like the way you and I probably think about it is the Fadiman protocol specifically for the most part, where it's, twice a week for 6 weeks, 2 weeks off, or however many weeks off, journaling, and it's always a sub-perceptual dose. I have very specific doubts about people taking a small enough dose most of the time.
Well, and that's what me and Dr. Passy were talking about too, and that was his kind of criticism of it as well. As I remember, just like, are people taking sub-perceptual doses, or are they taking a threshold dose where they're starting to feel something, right? And then that's microdosing to them, or are they actually doing the sub-perceptual where you're not really feeling anything, but something on the subtle energy level or subtle levels, something is churning or happening, like you're feeling it. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, are people taking just low dose, not, or maybe like a mini dose versus like a micro dose? Right.
So like, I want to make like a differentiation in this thing I write between macro dosing and mini or micro. So like macro is just, you can see it, right? Like you can see an ant. It's still pretty small, but you can see an ant. But you have to use a microscope to see like, the details on a speck of dust or something, or a spore. And so like microscopic versus macroscopic. And so like that being the division point, I remember talking to some chemist and lawyer who's working in the psilocybin space, and he was furious about the term micro because he wanted to use it in the term of like micrograms, like specifically a metric system measurement. But that's kind of like an OCD kind of chemist deal.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, this is what's in the vernacular already. We just have to like use it appropriately and come up with, specific guidelines around this. Like I know there's plenty of books on this topic and online classes and whatnot, but the majority of people doing microdosing aren't necessarily educating themselves, and perhaps they're taking a 0.5 gram twice a week or every day of mushrooms. Or
right.
Maybe they're taking a 1/2 hit of acid every day, which I know some people doing that. Not the best. And then they did raise that whole 5-HT2A thing with the thickening of the heart valve and like the relationship to the fen-phen kind of heart attacks and the MLB years ago. So
what was the answer to that? Because I remember I brought that up to Dr. Passy, and it sounded like he wasn't
no data
as concerned. He said, it just seemed like that was something that was more associated with fen-phen versus like could be much different than something with like LSD and psilocybin.
Right. Consensus is we need more data, but largely like people are taking grams or milligrams of this stuff daily or all the time, and they're only taking like micrograms of this other stuff.
Right.
So realistically, it shouldn't be a problem, but it's something that we need to research before we can say like no heart issues from psychedelics. It's like we don't totally know. I know that that's kind of against the grain because we want to be pro psychedelics all the time, but let's be cautious, everybody. Let's not spoil the pot for everybody.
Right. Yeah, it's important. Cool. So anything else that like really stood out, or any talks that really stood out from the conference or festival?
I didn't know how charismatic Trad Cotter was going to be. Really fun public speaker. He did the keynote on the closing night and went for about an hour and a half, and I could have gone for at least another 45 minutes. Nice. It was so funny. So he's kind of like giving a recap of like his life, his growing up in a military family, growing up in the South. He had like a full ride scholarship to a military academy and said, "Oh, sorry, Dad, I'm just going to join this band and tour the country and grow mushrooms."
Wow.
I was like,
Total
that's
opposite.
so funny. Colonel father. He was probably disappointed. It was great though. So he gets into his whole like Jamaican adventure. So he's going to be doing some sort of retreats in Jamaica. There's no real details shared. And then the most exciting thing he had was these methods of, he's working on this, and it might be in hospitals in the nearish future. So essentially you pull out like the particular strain of antibiotic resistant stuff that's in you, and culture it out, and then you introduce it into like you've seen these bags of sterilized colonized grain, like the rye grain. So like, I think shiitake and oyster. So like very particular forms of that. So you introduce that disease that's in you, and hopefully it can try to get a foothold in the colonized bag. And the mushroom actually responds by fighting back against that culture. So mushrooms are really good at fighting each other and fighting like bacteria and whatever else is, competitive for food and space. It's kind of like a lot like biology. Like it's competitive, right? It's kind of dark. So he was showing a lot of slides of how dark it can get with like mushrooms eating like other mushrooms and fungi and petri dishes. And so essentially he's thinking that, and kind of proven, and I don't know at what level, proven that he can make mushroom byproducts that will fight disease in humans in less than 24 hours. So you come into the hospital 24 hours later, you can have a custom treatment thing just for you.
Wow.
Because the mushroom learned how to fight that very particular thing in a short period of time, that same product can then go into you, quote unquote, safely.
Interesting. So they would take that out and then introduce it, and then that just amount of time of the mushroom fighting it, then they could make some sort of like medicine, vaccine, whatever they're doing with that.
Right. And they're wildly adaptive.
Wow.
Mushrooms are wildly adaptive. And like, okay, you got this new competitor in your space. How can I fight you? Learns how to fight you in the course of a few iterations and communicates that across their mycelial network and starts producing it at scale.
Wow.
And it's this like fluid that builds up in the bag around that stuff. And that can be used as a treatment. He kind of like
that. It's crazy.
Right? So that to me was like, oh shit, we're in this whole new era of like biological treatments that perhaps could be way better than antibiotics. Like, what if we didn't need to use antibiotics anymore? We could just use this. Like, that would be phenomenal. And this whole superbug issue would kind of hopefully go away. And what's cool is that you could do this in Haiti, in a small village. Like, you just have a couple little sandwich bags, and potentially you have like a orally active solution you can consume to get rid of this shit. Wow. Which would be phenomenal. Like, there's going to need to be years more data on this.
Right. But just the idea itself is just fascinating. Yeah. It almost sounds like kind of like personalized medicine in a sense, where you're like using an organism to help figure out a problem and a solution, and then using that. That's just really fascinating to think about.
Right. I mean, so there are cancer treatments going on that are kind of like this, not using mushrooms, but like, culturing out very specific cells from your cancer site and like doing very targeted, your own immune system, like kind of like a stem cell model, but slightly different.
Right.
It's pretty freaking cool. And another point, not psychedelic, was this ability to very specifically target individual pests for agriculture issues. So like you could get this specific kind of grasshopper that's going to destroy millions of dollars of crops and infect that somehow with a cordyceps type mushroom that would colonize the whole insect body and produce mushrooms and also infect other target pests near you. So sounds horrifying, but it's an alternative to pesticide use where it would poison the soil, groundwater, rivers and ocean, and your well water. So like, kill one type of moth, or, poison everything, including the planet, essentially.
Right. And that's something like Stament's been working on, isn't it? Like, that sounds
He collaborates with Stamets. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's no product in market that does this currently, which is super interesting. I think Dow or Monsanto bought it and then just took it off the market because they have like
they don't have anything to do with it.
50 billion plus in like pesticide sales that doesn't really fly. So I found that to be pretty interesting. Just meeting everybody there at the conference too, who's active in the psychedelic space, in the mushroom space, was really cool. People from all over the world. Met some cool folks from the Northwest, some folks from Colorado. This is a little dark, but apparently there's mushrooms growing on Terence McKenna's grave that people eat.
Oh my God.
Which I don't think that's coming right from his body. I think someone did that.
Oh my God.
But I probably wouldn't eat those mushrooms. It doesn't mean people aren't. Like it's, this is hearsay. I don't have any evidence, so could be fake. But that was interesting. We got to do some like kind of integration circles like we would do for breath work.
Cool.
That was kind of neat. I got to see a total stranger facilitate in an excellent way, like really firm with like people that might have rolled up a little too late to jump into a big circle like that. That was cool.
I guess something that's coming up for me is like, what was the format like? I mean, you know, it doesn't sound like a traditional conference. It's a festival. So is it just all spread out throughout town? Were there different stages, vendors? Like what was it like?
Yeah. Well, let's see if I got a map and I can describe it. So the high school in town is beautiful. That was like the biggest theater. It's called the Palm. That's down on one end of town. The exact opposite end of town is where the campground is that some people can get spots at. There's this place called the Elks Lodge. They did some events. There was a main kind of like park area with some vendors set up, like maybe 3 or 4 vendor tents in there, people selling grain and statues, grain spawn, festival type clothes. And that was where the identification tent was. So people would constantly be going on mushroom forays. So you would sign up in the morning and jump in on a tour. It's part of the conference. And mushroom expert would take you on a hike through the woods. They would like drive out on a van or something, and you just go on a kind of like a small guided tour and bring your mushrooms back. And there's a couple experts, like I don't know, anywhere from like 2 to 8 experts that would identify the mushrooms and categorize them for you, like show you what they were and why they knew what they were, and then you could go put them over in the section where they were all kind of like categorized by species.
Cool.
That was sick. And then other side of the main street, there's maybe another 8 vendors or so, you know, amazing kombuchas, mushroom elixirs. There was like a mushroom beef jerky that was interesting.
I've seen those a bunch. I've actually tried them, and they're, I mean, okay. I mean, it's not like beef jerky, but definitely.
So there was a guy from Arizona, from outside Sedona, that I connected with, got his number, that actually casts real psilocybin mushrooms and makes really detailed metal jewelry out of cubensis mushrooms. Thought that was super cool.
I think you posted some of that on Instagram stories, right? I think I saw a picture of that. That looked really
Designs
cool.
by Klein or something like that. Got his card here. It was super cool, yeah. At Design by Klein, probably on Instagram. Design by Klein, Cline. It was pretty cool. But yeah, it was just amazing to check all that out. So right near where all the kombucha, the statues were, was another theater. That was where the majority of events were. Everything was kind of ticketed because there's potentially too many people for that particular theater. So you grabbed a ticket like an hour before showtime and you could get in line in that order, kind of like Southwest. The keynotes were over at the Palm most nights, like where I was saying. And, you know, events spread out around town. So like the sharing circle was down at like the town park near camping. So they just like got you in nature in a nice little shaded park and sat in a circle and got to talk about experiences, which was really, really cool. Some people had never shared before, you know, as we see often, like, you've been a closeted psychedelic enthusiast for a long time and it's part of your personal, you know, religious or spiritual practice, and you've not been able to tell a soul your whole life, potentially not even your wife.
It's huge for some people.
Huge. Yeah. So, you know, that was pretty amazing. It's an example of the map.
Nice.
Just 6, 7 sites, 8.
Yeah, so it's just like spread all throughout town there.
Yeah, essentially. It's a beautiful town surrounded by mountains on all sides. The gondola is free to ride. You go up, across, and down into what they call Mountain Village, which is a beautiful little mountain town, ski resort type setup. And yeah, it's beautiful. I really want to go next year. Next year will be their 40th. And I'm super excited. It's essentially a Colorado-based psychedelic conference. And it's small, yes, but the connections you can make are really special. I would advise people check it out next year.
And who would want to just be hanging out in Telluride, hanging out with a bunch of mushroom people? I mean, it just sounds pretty awesome. I wish I could have went next year.
Yeah, next year. Let's try to make that happen. Thankfully, Breaking Convention won't be on the same weekend next year because that's every other year.
There's a lot of things happening, yeah.
Jeez. Yeah, man. I think there was a Chacruna event also the same weekend, or there's another event happening elsewhere as well that I was seeing pop up. I was like, oh man, this is a busy weekend. And then like Burning Man starts really soon if it's not already started. I'm like, oh man. So yeah, next year, hopefully I score Burning Man tickets and I can go right to Burning Man from Telluride. See if I can make that happen. Yeah, cool. So I guess that's a pretty good run through.
Any big takeaways or one big thing that you took away from the event?
The very last thing said by anybody, it was by Trad Cotter. This is where you quit your job and dedicate your life to mushrooms. Like it's not too hard to become a mushroom farmer or to set up a small little mushroom lab and have a business around it. It's really, there's not many businesses you can start with under $5,000, and that is one of them. You're going to need a little bit of equipment, a little bit of know-how, but 3 or 4 books like the Stamets books and maybe that Radical Mycology book, you're off to the races. And there's that world is young.
Yeah.
That world is very young. And there's endless business opportunities related to mushrooms. And mushroom people are cool. It's like the smart people that are into nature and probably also have an interest in psychedelic mushrooms. So why wouldn't you want to be in that field? I'm a little jealous that I can't start a mushroom farm, but I'm also doing something pretty cool here.
Right, yeah. Maybe you have a few like shiitake logs and sell them to the local restaurants around Breck.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. I really miss growing.
Is it too high up in Breck to grow any type of mushroom?
No, totally not. There's tons of mushrooms in the woods. I forget if I think I growed shiitake here in Breck once at 9,600 feet.
Nice.
But it was like, pretty warm apartment. Nothing to do with altitude. It's more just like climate control.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If you can keep it moist enough and warm enough, you're in good shape.
Yep.
And what would be cool about in Breck is that it's so cold here that you wouldn't need to air condition your space when there's like tons of these bricks of mushroom growing. And it, the air could keep it cool and they could like kind of self-heat. So you could potentially save money on your heating bill. Yeah. So, yeah.
You're onto something there.
Yeah. All right. I guess that's it for now, Kyle. Yeah.
All right, cool. I know you got to get running, so we'll end this here, and I hope everybody enjoyed this episode.
And there you have it. Telluride Mushroom Festival 2019 in the books. I hope to go again next year. It will be their 40th. You can learn more at TellurideInstitute.com. Their YouTube videos should be up very soon, so you can catch every lecture that was given. I was thoroughly impressed with the conference yet again. I went years ago and was blown away, and this just continued to make me love the field of mycology even more. So, hope you enjoyed the episode. And again, check out our Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and Navigating Psychedelics for general audience. You can check that all out at psychedelicstoday.com. Thank you all for tuning in. It's Joe Moore signing off.